Good morning, everyone. We will be starting our webinar on construction compliance in just a moment here. Good morning again. Just wanted to let everybody know we'll be starting our webinar on construction compliance in just a moment. Just giving people a minute or two to join, and then we'll get started. Good morning again, everyone. Just one more minute. We'll give people just another minute to join, and then we'll get started on our webinar regarding construction compliance. All right, I think we are ready to get started here. So let me click on to our next slide and go through a little bit of housekeeping. Everyone has been muted for the webinar. There is a Q&A section available. If you'd like to put any questions in there, please feel free to do so, and I will monitor those during the webinar. We will address the questions towards the end, but feel free to enter questions as they come to mind. So to introduce myself, my name is Sean Garrity. I'm a client success manager at Crestwood. Along with me today is Robert Sternberg. He's our director of Acumatica Services, and he's going to be presenting the webinar today. The agenda for our webinar today is construction compliance. We're going to be talking about automating compliance, the different reporting tools that we have available, and audit preparation with a streamlined process there. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Robert and let him take it away.
Fantastic. Sean, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Wonderful. Then I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I do want to talk about three main areas inside of construction compliance: automated compliance, reporting tools, and audit preparation. That's what we will focus on today. And Acumatica has many areas that focus on construction compliance in the system. Everything from our GAAP compliance, which is on the accounting and financial side, through documenting safety and training regulations, including OSHA certificates, and then all the way through subcontractor and vendor documentation. So we'll touch on each of these areas throughout today's presentation. And in fact, if you have Construction Edition already installed, there's an entire compliance workspace inside of Acumatica. This is broken into separate categories. So in the upper left, I have compliance management, and this is a profile screen that lets you track different documents and monitor their life cycle inside of Acumatica. We also have built-in compliance reporting tools that break out compliance information by vendor, project, and even get down to specifics like lien waivers. Finally, we have compliance preferences and setup. Now, this is something that you will not need to modify very often, but it lets you get much more granular into how we're going to apply construction rules. Truthfully, the fact that Acumatica has the process is just the starting component towards construction compliance. I'm borrowing a page out of something called the EOS model, which is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. This is something that we use internally at Crestwood, and we've found that the process, which I'm showing on my screen now, has really been a game changer in how we apply the different methodologies. So construction compliance starts the human element. If I look all the way on the left-hand side of my screen, that's step number one. It's the hardest step, and it's committing. Right? We're going to put our compliance information in Acumatica. We're going to keep it up to date. We're going to go on this journey of being more rigid in our structure. After we commit as a leadership team, we go into something called this three-step process documenter. And step number one, I'm in the center of my page now, is to identify what we need to record. So I mentioned OSHA documents earlier and recording it inside of Acumatica. Maybe you have a very rigid process for going through training, collecting certificates, and then storing the information. That's something that you do want to identify early on, because if we work towards our audit compliance, our automation, this only is meaningful when we have the information to us. There's a difference between automagic and automatic, right? So we need to be able to crawl, walk, and run. So step number one is identify. Step number two is breaking it down and documenting your process. We're going to put people through a training. We're going to have all of the certificates emailed or sent to one central collection area, and we're going to record it in our system of choice. So that's step number two, is we need to document. Underneath that word document, dead in the center of your screen, is the word simplify. That's in parentheses, but it's just as large as the word document on purpose. It's important that we're not getting a structure that's hard to maintain. We're simplifying. We're breaking it down into our best practices. Creating an SOP folder that's 100 pages deep to record how we're going to store our certificates means that it's harder to onboard individuals, it's harder to keep them up to speed, and it's more difficult to manage this going forward. The third step is to package that. And the wonderful element about packaging is this is one piece that we can take out of the process. Acumatica is going to fill in the gap. We're going to look at multiple screens today and where you can record this information. Then we enter a virtuous cycle. It's only as good as our training. How are we informing our individuals of this process? How are they coming through and executing on the logic? Then we measure, right? Are we doing what we set out to do? Are we documenting? Do we have additional areas that we need to bring into the process? That puts us into step three on the right-hand side of my page, which is manage. Areas can come out of the process, they can come into the process, or option four is to update. Step four, process is to update. In the middle of the circle on the right-hand side of my screen, you see FBA. And FBA stands for followed by all. A process is only as good as it is executed. So monitoring the four stages inside of the circle, train, measure, manage, and update, are just as important as taking the step to initially document the process. So I like to start by saying, even though Acumatica has an entire workspace dedicated to this, and profiles and screens, making sure that we have a concept around how we'll manage the people element is just as important. Let's move back to our construction compliance areas. Two main focuses of today. We're going to focus on accounting and financial documentation, as well as subcontractor and vendor documentation. Along the way, we'll touch just about everything on this page in one way or another. But the goal here is to let you know that you can do this, right? This is not an insurmountable challenge. So taking this head on is how we get started in more rigorous construction compliance and essentially reduce our risk at the end of the day. So let's break into the accounting and financial areas. Three main focuses. How do we get ahead of an audit? That word ahead is probably the most important word in this bullet, right? Audits are going to come. We know that that's the case. So the more that we can prepare and be able to respond is the less it disrupts our day-to-day activities when the audit arrives. The second is automation tools and AI measures. Acumatica is putting AI first in their product strategy, and we need to be on the cutting edge of how we can use AI to reduce our risk and to really give us knowledge to take action. And the last is the auditing configurations and minimize risk, kind of package the upper two bullet points into what we can do in Acumatica. So let's break into the automation tools and AI. Acumatica has a tool called anomaly detection. And essentially, this allows you to apply the AI technology that's becoming more and more prevalent to your data sets in Acumatica. So we're able to input project data. We're able to look at our AR. So when we actually send out our bills, we're able to monitor that information. And we're able to have a date parameter as well as a series of fields that start to track anomalies over time. So we're able to get real-time information. And if we want to take this a step further in that crawl, walk, run approach, we can set email reminders, SMS text messages to go out when we detect anomalies or when projects go over budget, when we have bills that are unpaid and past their due dates. So we can take AI as well as some automation tools and package this together to really give you some beneficial information. I want to tie this into our other areas. If we have an audit coming, getting ahead is key. So the quicker we can respond using these tools and correct the data if needed or take action if needed means that we're setting ourselves up for success. So anomaly detection in Acumatica is going to be a real game changer for this area of construction compliance. The second is auditing configurations. Acumatica automatically records the person that created any document in the system, when they created it, and on what screen they created it. It also records the same information anytime the screen was modified. And this is the foundations for auditing inside of Acumatica. We can tell who created a document, who modified it last, and when. But we can take that to the next level if we're required to report on particular auditing fields. Acumatica has a strategy called field level auditing, and this lets us monitor specific fields on screens every single time they're changed, as well as changed by who and when. So if we want to break to the next level of auditing for compliance, we can enable field level audit, and we can pick those particular fields and screens where we want the extra levels of measure. Inside of this, we will have printable audit reports that we can print at any time for a screen that we're auditing, and that can provide information about when it was changed and the fields. It records the previous value and the future value. So we're able to log that more quickly. Big takeaway here is we need to turn on this feature and we need to determine which fields we want to measure to this level of detail before we need it. It's the most difficult part in this process because Acumatica will only start storing the log of this very fine detail after we turn it on. So why not turn it on for every field inside of Acumatica? The answer is simple. We're going to be recording previous values and new values of every single field we turn on with this field level auditing. So not only does that take additional space inside of your system, which is negligible in the age of modern ERPs, but it also creates a busier audit report if we're not using the information. And every time Acumatica saves a record, it will need to save the previous and new values of each field inside of Acumatica. So we'd like to be very specific about when and where we turn this on to make your system the most effective for you. So I always say data is only good if we're going to use it for a specific purpose. Otherwise, it's data for data's sake. You can apply a very simple principle to auditing in that same manner. So let's not audit for auditing's sake. It creates more work for you to dig through the audit trail than if you focus on the fields that are going to be important to you. So this is something that we want to get ahead of if we do need field level audit. On the subcontractor and vendor areas of the system, we have the ability to attach information to a vendor record. So if we're tracking our vendor's compliance or our subcontractor compliance, that can all be stored inside of Acumatica rather than in a file repository on your desktop where you need to sift through and find that information. We want it at our fingertips when the time comes to pull the records, and Acumatica's built-in file management system will allow us to do it. Next is we have some automated policy verification. So we can come in and see expiration dates and update our documents in real time on our profile screen. We'll see an example of that in just a moment. And then last, 1099 compliance and tools. I know I'm mentioning 1099. We just got through 1099 season, but that's all the more reason to focus. What did we learn? What can we take away from our 1099 process this year that we can improve on next year to make this easier to manage for construction compliance? So let's break into that subcontractor and vendor areas in the system. We're going to start with that vendor attachment management. In Acumatica, you can drag and drop files onto records. So if we open our vendor screen, we can simply drag and drop or add a file in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. But who has seen this search in files screen? It's much less commonly used, but this lets us really narrow down our definition. So whether we're pulling our compliance documentation that has been attached in the past, or whether we're updating our compliance documents every quarter, or whether we're having a particular individual add all of our compliance information and keep it up to date, the search in files screen lets us consolidate this information. So this goes back to our process conversation earlier. Defining your process and documenting makes our auditing and reporting much more advantageous down the road because we have this great ability to search into the information. So this does track revision over time as well. So if you want to update a document but see all of the prior versions, Acumatica handles that natively. If you pull in a file with the same file name, it essentially layers into revisions. It's automatically secured. So users that have access to the subcontractor record would automatically have access to pull the compliance documents, which really makes this process much more available to us in Acumatica and achievable. And then finally, that search and file screen. Definitely something that you want to bookmark and get familiar with because it's a fantastic way to search for files across Acumatica. That's a little bit about file management inside of Acumatica. But where are these files, right? How do we track this going forward? So inside of the construction compliance workspace, you have a compliance management screen. And this compliance management screen can track insurance policies, lien waivers, certificates, training materials, OSHA cards, you name it. All right, this is a repository for you. This can both be used internally to track your own compliance documentation, or it can be attached to a vendor or subcontractor. So this is not limited to external users. This also allows you to attach compliance documents to particular projects in Acumatica. And when we attach the compliance information to a project, it becomes immediately available inside of the project hub. So this is something that we should get very familiar with. It's a fantastic system. It tracks the expiration as well, as I mentioned, and will give you notices, as you can see on the left-hand side of my screen, when that certificate or document expires. And then we can work towards the automation front and send emails out to our vendor that it's attached to, out to our subcontractor that it's attached to that says, I need your new information, right? They'll forward that to maybe a centralized mailbox, and we'll be able to pull it into Acumatica. And that's the virtuous cycle of the process. We need to be rigorous in how we define that information, so that way we can carry it all the way through the system. So that's our subcontractor and vendor policies. On the 1099 front, this is something that I really encourage you to get in front of. 1099 information can change, right? We've had some changes in our formats. We've had some changes in our thresholds. Acumatica does provide updates to the 1099 information every year. So you can automatically pull in that new information with an update to Acumatica, and your 1099 information will stay up to date as well. We can go back through and really track, do we have all of our subcontractors tagged for their 1099 information on the vendor record itself? Once it's tagged on the vendor record, anytime we create an AP bill, anytime we add a line, the 1099 information travels from the vendor to the AP bill line. So that saves one step in your process of needing to update that information. If we do not apply that on the vendor record, at any time we can update an AP bill line and attach the 1099 information. So reducing the amount of clicks, reducing the amount of work is going to make your 1099 process much smoother. So take the time. It'll only take an hour or two to go through your vendor list and tag any of your 1099 vendors as such now. Okay, do that now and you're ahead of this information that comes towards the end of the year where we need to start compiling all that our information. When we do, we can print 1099 information out of Acumatica. In the last several years, we've been limited to 10 1099s if we want to print the information, but Acumatica has built-in e-filing. I should say that that limitation is set by the IRS, not Acumatica. We can print as many 1099s as you need, but once you're over 10 in the last several years, you've been required to e-file. So you can e-file out of Acumatica directly. And last is remember to maintain those 1099 records like we were mentioning earlier. Getting in front of this makes your life much easier when we need to start reporting. So that's another way that we can remain in compliance throughout the year and pull accurate reports and forecasting is by keeping this completely up to date. And with that, I will turn it back over to Sean for a quick Q&A session from the group. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Robert. That was some wonderful information you shared. Sounds like taking advantage of the compliance features in Acumatica can really help companies become more efficient in tracking this information, and not having to spend, extraneous time working through spreadsheets that aren't connected and have all of the data in one place. Let's see what we have for questions. It looks like we have, all right, I have the first question. Are we able to be proactive in stopping users from paying AP bills?
Sean, if we have the time, I'd like to pull up Acumatica and maybe show that.
Absolutely, that sounds great.
Fantastic. Let me share my screen. The one that comes through for you.
Great, I can see it now.
Fantastic. So I mentioned a compliance workspace inside of Acumatica, and we have our profile area on the left, followed by reports in the center, and tucked inside of compliance preferences, there are 3 options that we can enable today, right? And it's going to be for outstanding lien waivers. We can actually work towards limiting how a user interacts with AP bills when there is an outstanding lien waiver. So we can simply warn users during the entry of a new AP bill to say, you need to collect your lien waiver at this time. We can warn users when they select that bill for payment, essentially saying, if you're going to pay this bill, please reach out and collect the updated information. And then the last is we can entirely prevent payment of that AP bill and keep us in compliance with our metrics towards the lien waivers. So those are our 3 ways we can be proactive in stopping our users or warning our users when they're interacting with vendors that are outside of our compliance metrics. Great question.
Excellent, thank you. I know people always appreciate seeing real live examples, so that was great. Let me check and see if we have any additional questions here. All right, it looks like we do. Do we know of any way to allow the compliance management to be filtered by branch? It seems like the only inquiry in Acumatica that doesn't.
So inside of that compliance management system, it pulls from a data class behind the scenes. And inside of that data class, we would need to essentially add a branch element. The other option is if you attach it to a project that's associated with a particular branch, then we could filter based on that, building out a generic inquiry. So I would say as a phase 1, let's attach the document to a project. And then as phase 2, we would build out a generic inquiry to filter on the branch of that project. So that's a way that we can build out this compliance management down to a single branch.
Perfect, thank you. It looks like that's it for questions at this point. I would like to check with the audience. If anybody has additional questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A, and we're more than happy to answer them for you at this time. And let me go back to sharing my screen. Since there are no additional questions at this time, it looks like we'll go through just a little bit of a recap to go over the information that Robert provided. As he mentioned, really important to follow the process and to have everybody involved in it. It's not just one person doing everything. We need everyone on the team involved following the same process. That helps us keep financial compliance in place, and it helps you manage your vendors much better. We're more than happy to speak with anybody further about this topic if they have additional questions. So please don't hesitate to contact myself, any other customer success manager that you work with, or any consultant that you're working with at Crestwood, or a salesperson. And we're more than happy to dive into this further with you. One last check to see if there are any additional questions at this time. We do recommend to anyone who is interested the EOS book that we discussed, or that Robert discussed in our presentation. If you are interested in it, it's called Process by Mike Patton and Lisa Gonzalez. Excellent book. We know it's made great changes at Crestwood, so we do recommend it to anybody that's interested. And with that, we will wrap up and say thank you for attending today. Again, if there's anything that we can do to help you, provide additional information, or answer any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone that you're in contact with at Crestwood, and we're more than happy to help. Thank you very much for attending today, and everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.